Hey guys, tonight we're going to talk about the surprisingly busy and sometimes ridiculous life of humans who lived in the Stone Age. What did cavemen actually do all day? It turns out that it wasn't just about smashing rocks and finding fire. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Please tell me in the comments where you are and what time it is where you are. It's always interesting to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, turn off the bright lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's start our journey together tonight. The average day for a caveman began at dawn, or slightly before, depending on how loud the wind was or whether someone nearby started coughing again. Most people slept on animal skins or directly on hard-packed earth, sometimes with a layer of dried grass or leaves to cushion them. You probably slept near a fire, not for the look of it, but to keep warm and safe from insects and wild animals. If you slept away from the group, you might wake up missing a foot. Most people slept in small, tight groups, including families and other members of the local community. Privacy didn't exist. Everyone heard everything. The first thing you did after you woke up was check the fire. If it stopped working, someone had to turn it back on. That could take time, and you would need to be patient. If it was cold outside, which often happened depending on the season, everyone would be grumpy until the weather got warmer. Next, you should check your tools and weapons. This includes things like spears, knives, and scrapers. Anything you could use for hunting or protection. These had to be kept in good condition. If you lost your tools, you couldn't get food, defend yourself, or process meat and hides. Some people in the group were better than others at this, and it was normal to borrow equipment from someone more skilled, although they probably expected something in return. Children were usually the first to make noise. They would start moving around to look for something to eat or something to do, or both. Adults would gradually get up and start getting ready for the day. This could mean finding water, checking nearby traps, or going out to look for signs of animals. No one was relaxed all day. There was no time for that. Your daily goal was simple. Keep warm, find food, and be careful not to get hurt. If you woke up, your fire was still burning and nothing outside looked dangerous, you were already ahead. In the Stone Age, people took care of their personal hygiene, just not in the way we think of it today. It was mostly practical, not how it looked. You cleaned yourself when it started getting in the way of your life, or when the smell was affecting other people too. People bathed, but this depended a lot on the time of year and where they lived. If there was a stream, people washed in it when the water wasn't too cold. Otherwise, cleaning might involve wiping off dirt with leaves, handfuls of sand, or, on rare luxury occasions, animal fat. That's right. People used to scrub their skin with fat, which sounds strange until you realize that it also kept them warm and protected them from insects. Teeth were another matter. There were no toothbrushes, so some people chewed sticks or bones to clean their teeth. Teeth wearing was common, especially since the Paleolithic diet involved tough meat, unprocessed grains, and sand particles from grinding stones that got into food. Cavemen didn't brush their teeth, but they also didn't eat sweets, so they hardly ever got tooth decay. But tooth loss from injury or was a different matter. They didn't pay much attention to their hair. Hair was usually long, tied back, or simply ignored. Lice were common. Some groups used ash, dirt, or animal fats to get rid of pests. Others may have tried scratching a lot and hoping it would go away. There's also evidence from later prehistoric periods of primitive combs or grooming tools, so it seems that some effort was made eventually. The clothes didn't help. Animal skins weren't breathable and were rarely washed. If they smelled something, people either got used to it or blamed the person sitting closest to the fire. Most people's feet were either bare or covered in shoes that went all the way around. As you can imagine, the smell of a prehistoric cave was very different. But here's the surprising part. Even though there was no soap or showers, early humans adapted well. Their immune systems were strong, and their communities knew enough about cleanliness to avoid major outbreaks. In fact, people probably smelled about the same. So, nobody really noticed unless you did something extreme, like rolling around in a dead animal. Some people even did that for breakfast, just to blend in with their surroundings. There was no fixed time for eating. People ate when they could, what they could, and only if there was food left over from the day before. If you woke up to find a bit of dried meat still hanging by the fire, congratulations. You'd won the lottery of the prehistoric era. But most mornings didn't start like that. If the hunt had gone wrong last night, or if the food had already been eaten or stolen by a raccoon-like creature that wanted more, then breakfast meant looking for food. This might mean digging for roots, checking nearby berry bushes, or looking carefully at the landscape for edible plants that haven't already been taken by animals or children. The choices were seasonal. In the spring, there were lots of green vegetables. In the summer, there were lots of fruits. And in the winter, people went hungry. Protein was more unpredictable. Small animals like birds, rabbits, or insects were sometimes caught and eaten whole or roasted. Insects were a reliable source of protein, even if nobody was particularly excited about eating them. If you find a termite mound or a bunch of grubs, they might be your breakfast. They didn't taste great, but they didn't bite back either. Sometimes you would share with other people, especially with members of your own family. But food was a resource, not a courtesy. If someone brought breakfast, it meant they were generous or in charge, or both. Water was another important thing to consider. If you were lucky, you could get water from streams, springs, and rivers. If not, puddles had to do. At that time, most people did not boil water. Instead, they drank it raw, and sometimes it had bacteria in it. You either won or lost. Sometimes, there would be food left over from the last big hunt. This could be smoked meat, marrow from cracked bones, or dried strips of hide that you could eat if you chewed them enough. These were valuable. People stored them high up, wrapped them up, or hid them, but nothing could stop a determined child with a stick. So every morning was a new gamble. You might find a few berries and a roasted squirrel. You might not find anything. Either way, nobody deliberately skipped breakfast. After breakfast, or if breakfast wasn't happening, the next big job was to take care of the tools. Tools weren't just for show. They were survival equipment. If you didn't have a good edge on your knife, you wouldn't be able to cut meat, scrape hides, or defend yourself. We spent a lot of time standing on our knees, hitting other rocks to try and get them to the right shape. Welcome to making tools like people did in the Stone Age. It's a mix of being good at your work and trying again. But you have to be careful not to smash your thumb. The material used was flint or obsidian if you had access to a volcano. These stones chipped easily, which meant you could sharpen edges and make cutting tools. The basic starter pack included hand axes, scrapers, spearheads, and the very popular rock with a handle. There was no one solution that worked for everyone. Each tool had its own purpose. Some were used for butchering, others for shaping wood, and some for tasks we still don't fully understand, but probably involve hitting things. Most people made their own tools, but like everything else, some were better at it than others. If someone in the group was good at making spear points that were perfectly balanced, they would be respected and other people would ask them for help. Sharpening tools was a constant task. A dull edge was basically useless and, even worse, dangerous. You'd either hurt yourself or waste time. Stones were ground, flaked, and tested every day. And yes, sometimes this meant spending 2 hours making something that broke after just 2 minutes of use. You didn't complain. You've just started again. People often passed down toolkits, traded them, or even stole them. If you lost yours, you were in big trouble. You weren't just embarrassed. If you didn't have anything sharp to hand, then something with claws would usually appear. Sometimes I got some good ideas. Someone might tie a rock to a stick cover it in animal skin, and call it hammer. Others discovered tools made from bone. These tools were light and easy to handle and perfect for small, precise tasks. These inventions were the start of later technological revolutions, even if the people who invented them were mostly just trying to work faster. When everything was ready and we had eaten breakfast or not, it was time to start the main event, the hunt. Hunting in the Stone Age wasn't a hobby that people did on their own. It was a group effort, often involving everyone who could help, plus one guy who mostly shouted useful things like, "Go left," and that's not a deer. The best prizes were the large animals. Mammoths, bison, and wild horses. Anything big enough to feed the whole group for a week was worth the risk. But they were also dangerous. Mammoths didn't just stand around waiting to be speared. They were fast, heavy, and had no patience for hairless humans with wooden sticks. Planning a hunt took a lot of coordination. The scouts went to follow the herds. Others prepared traps, pits covered with branches, natural choke points near rivers, or just steep cliffs if the group was feeling ambitious and slightly reckless. Then there was the ambush. There was a lot of yelling, spear throwing, and running. The hope was that something big would happen, preferably before someone in your group did. It was easier to hunt smaller animals like deer, boar, and rabbits. They used spears, clubs, and clever ambushes. Traps and snares also helped. This is perfect for hunters on their own or in small groups. But even with smaller animals, things went wrong. If you make a mistake, you might find yourself chasing a pig through the woods while trying to explain to your group how you almost had it. Sometimes the hunting party came back with meat and bones, and the other group had to admit that they had won. Other times they came back with nothing but scrapes and excuses. The wind shifted direction, which was a popular one. He was blaming anyone who had sneezed during the ambush. Meat wasn't just food, it was all about status. The person who delivered the kill often got to choose first, got more respect, and had fewer chores that night, but sharing was still common. You needed your group, and when you stopped eating meat, there were awkward silences around the campfire. Hunting wasn't just about survival. It was all about working together, taking risks, and using smart tactics. Try not to get stepped on. Not everyone in the Stone Age hunted mammoths. Some people had a much more practical job, finding things that didn't fight back. Looking for food wasn't as exciting as hunting, but it was very important and usually worked better. You might not always catch a deer, but there's a pretty good chance you'll find a berry bush. The foraging crew, often made up of women, older adults, and children who weren't old enough to throw a spear without hitting a tree, covered a lot of ground. They looked for edible plants, berries, nuts, roots, seeds, mushrooms, and anything else that didn't taste like regret. Knowing what was safe to eat was a matter of trial and error. This meant that sometimes people died at funerals. Foragers developed strong mental maps of their terrain. They remembered which valleys had tubers, which trees dropped the best nuts, and which plants looked edible but definitely weren't. They passed this knowledge down carefully. If you think a good route is a poisonous one, you could turn your afternoon snack into an emergency. But it wasn't all safe and slow. Sometimes, people who collected food had to deal with wild animals. Too, birds, squirrels, and even bears all competed with each other for berries. And getting stung by a wasp while trying to get honey was a mistake that no one would make again. Foraging also meant doing lots of things at the same time. When looking for food, people might also collect things like firewood, feathers, bark, or herbs that can be used for medicine. Children followed along, learning how to do things, and sometimes try to eat things they shouldn't. You kept an eye on them and try not to lose track of anyone while arguing over whether that mushroom looked weird. This time, the food gathered was often more reliable than meat from a hunt. Plants don't run away. Nuts don't stab you. If you timed it right, you could get enough food from a single day's hunt to feed the whole group for several meals, or at least provide snacks between unsuccessful hunts. Foragers were the tribe's unsung heroes. They weren't overly dramatic. They didn't show off. But when the hunters came back without anything to show for their efforts, it was the gatherers who prepared the meal. If there was one thing that made life in the Stone Age bearable, it was fire. Fire cooked your food, kept you warm, scared off predators, and let you see your own feet after sunset. Without it, you were much less likely to survive. That's why every group had an unspoken rule. Don't let the fire go out. If someone was unlucky, they would be put on fire duty. This meant keeping an eye on the flames, feeding it with wood, and occasionally panicking if the wind shifted or the coals looked too dim. It wasn't glamorous, but it was essential. You could go without breakfast. You could go on a hunt that's not very good. But if the fire went out, that would be an emergency for the whole group. Starting a fire from scratch wasn't easy. This involved tools that create friction, such as fire drills or hand-spinning sticks over dry wood. If your hands were cold or your material damp, you could be there all day hoping a tiny piece of fire would show mercy. This is why many groups try to keep a single fire going at all times, even when moving camp. In some cases, people carried a glowing coal wrapped in moss or bark to keep the flame alive on the road. This person had one job, and the pressure was very real. Fuel collection was part of the deal, too. Dry wood, kindling, animal dung. Anything that burned without exploding was fair game. Children often helped, but sometimes they brought back things that looked like they might catch fire but weren't, like wet logs or mushrooms that were half buried. Fire maintenance also had a social side. The fire was the heart of camp life. People sat around it, told stories, shared food, and argued about whose turn it was to keep watch. The fire pit was like the original living room, except if someone fell asleep on duty, it could freeze everyone to death. No one got praise for keeping the fire going, but if it went out, there were no excuses. There were just a lot of angry looks, and someone said, "Guess who's making sparks tonight?" Many people think that all prehistoric people lived in caves, but this is not true. Caves were great if you could find one. They provided natural shelter, protection from the wind, and built-in walls. However, they weren't always available, especially if other groups or wild animals had already claimed them. So, like any determined human, early people built their own homes, sort of. In the Stone Age, buildings weren't built to look nice. There were no building plans, no architects, and certainly no rules about how the houses should be looked after. The main goal was simple: make sure the weather stays outside and the people stay inside. If there were no usable caves, people would build huts or shelters from wood, bones, mud, grass, and whatever else was lying around. The strong structure of branches or thick ribs would be held together with animal sinew or vines, then covered with hides, bark, or packed dirt. The result was a lopsided structure that leaked slightly less than standing outside. The building work was done by a team. One person held the sticks, another tied them together, and someone stood nearby pretending to know what they were doing. If it collapsed halfway through, nobody was surprised. You picked it up again and tried again, this time with extra stick. The weather was always a problem. Rain turned dirt floors into mud pits. The wind could rip away animal skins like nature was trying to change the decor. Snow can crush entire shelters if they are not made stronger. That's why some groups built temporary structures, light summer huts that people could quickly leave behind, and heavier winter shelters for long, miserable periods of freezing weather. Insulation was a luxury. If you were lucky, animal skins covered the walls and floor. If not, you just put on more clothes and complained. The fire stayed in the center with a hole in the roof to let smoke out, though usually just as much cold air got in. Furniture, not really. A rock to sit on, a flat place to nap, and maybe a pile of hides for sleeping. Luxury was a warm corner with no drafts and a roof that didn't drip. But even with limited materials, people in prehistoric times were able to build homes that worked well. They weren't pretty, but they kept you alive, mostly dry, and sometimes upright during a windstorm. Parenting in the Stone Age was very different from how it is today. There were no books or podcasts to help parents, and strollers were not used. When a child was born, you had to keep them alive in a dangerous world. You had to do it without losing your spear or your mind. Childbirth was a community event. It's painful, messy, and risky. If you survived it, congratulations. Now came the next challenge. Keeping your child warm, fed, and safe from the fire is important. There were no nappies. Babies were wrapped in animal skins or plant fibers, and mess was just part and parcel of life. You quickly learned to always put them down on rocks. Cleaning is easier. Mothers usually breastfed for years because there was no baby formula and it was not considered good for a toddler to chew meat. Discipline was practical. If a child came too close to a cliff, you wouldn't just give them a timeout. You grabbed them by the leg and shouted, "Don't fall." The situation was serious, so safety rules had to be taught quickly. Touching fire, chasing wolves, or eating unknown berries were all times when the rules could have been taught before anything exploded, burned, or made the person hallucinate. But being a Paleolithic parent wasn't all bad. Children played with sticks, stones, feathers, and insects all the time. They played with anything that looked interesting. They learned by playing. A child who liked throwing rocks might one day be the tribe's best hunter. If a child sits quietly and watches the elders, they might become a shaman or healer. Nobody ever asked, "What do you want to do when you're older?" You just became something depending on how good your survival skills are and how lucky you are. Older children helped with chores, gathering kindling, fetching water, and chasing birds away from the drying meat. By the time they were 10, they were thought of as almost being fully accepted members of society. It's still annoying, but now it's useful. There was no formal education, but children learned by watching, practicing, and trying new things. They didn't have toys. They had nature, and nature didn't come with safety instructions. After a long day of hunting, gathering, scraping, avoiding wild animals, and looking after their children without the aid of sedation, early humans finally got to enjoy a bit of what we might call downtime. Obviously, life in the Stone Age wasn't like having wine with lunch, but it wasn't nothing. The center of social activity was the fire. When it got dark and visibility got low, so you wouldn't fall over a sleeping dog, the group would stand around the flames. It wasn't for a party, but because it was the only thing that provided warmth and light without hurting. But it was still the place where the tribe met. People come here to eat, talk, and relax. Evening conversations weren't just about the weather. They were storytelling sessions. People shared the day's events, exaggerated hunts, and told tales about spirits, ancestors, or that one time someone fell into the river while chasing a fish. Storytelling wasn't just for fun. This is how knowledge was passed down in the past. Stories about what to eat, what to avoid, and where to go hunting. There was also some music and dancing, but it wasn't really planned. One person would hit 2 stones together at the same time in a regular pattern. Someone else might hum or chant along, and suddenly 3 children would start spinning in circles because no one told them not to. The instruments used included hollow bones, stretched high drums, and anything that made a vaguely satisfying sound. People also liked to show off a lot in their social lives. If someone had a successful hunt, they would talk about it a lot. If they made a sharp tool, they'd show it off while pretending not to care. Social status wasn't about money. It was about skills. Who could hunt? Who could lead? Who could keep the fire going without burning their own eyebrows off? And without flirting. Oh, it happened. There weren't many options, so romantic gestures were often small and not obvious. Some of the things that make you seem unfriendly are sharing food, sitting too close to someone, and not laughing when they say something silly. Relationships developed slowly, and usually with the quiet understanding that you didn't upset me today was a good sign. The way they showed their interest in a partner was not obvious, practical, and usually involved more physical contact than words. But early humans still found a way to work together. Even though there were no scented candles or deodorant, the first step in courtship was being close to each other. You lived in a small group of 20 to 40 people, so you could date anyone who wasn't already taken or not related to you. It's not perfect, but there was no version of Tinder in the past, unless you count the time when you locked eyes with someone while eating the same piece of roasted squirrel. Flirting was not like how it is today. It was quiet and strange. Sharing food was really important. If someone gave you the best piece of meat or a handful of berries that they didn't have to give up, that was interesting. Helping someone to collect a hide or carry water. Also a green flag. In the past, romance was based on effort, not on being able to speak well. Appearance mattered, but only a little. People weren't judging you on what you were wearing. Everyone wore some version of fur and dirt. What mattered was whether you survived. A good hunter or someone who can find food easily is more likely to attract a partner than someone who spends all day sitting by the fire, making sculptures that look strange. Pair bonds were often long-term, but not always permanent. People stayed together to help each other, look after their children, share food, and get through bad winters. If it wasn't working, it was gently separated. There is no paperwork, there are fewer shared tasks, and there are more awkward silences during group meals. Sexual relationships were probably more flexible than modern assumptions allow. Some experts who study people, called anthropologists, think that early humans were less possessive than later agricultural societies. Group dynamics, the need to survive, and mobility often had a bigger impact on relationship norms than personal jealousy. And of course, there were no love songs, just quiet companionship, a shared blanket, and a mutual understanding that neither of you wanted to get eaten alone. It may not have looked romantic, but it worked. Paleolithic couples built families, raised children, and got through storms. We never argued about who forgot to wash the dishes, mostly because there were no dishes to wash. Even though early humans always had to hunt and gather to survive, they still found time to do something that only humans can do: make art. They didn't have art galleries or museums, and they didn't have the abstract idea of art, but they did have walls. Big, cold cave walls that were just waiting to be decorated. The first cave paintings we know about are more than 30,000 years old. You can see famous examples in places like Lascaux and Chauvet in France today. These weren't just random doodles. They included animals like bison, deer, horses, and mammoths, often drawn with surprising accuracy and movement. Some of them had lines showing movement. Others had dots, handprints, or symbols that still have no meaning. What tools did they use? Nothing special, just natural pigments like charcoal, ochre, and manganese. It's made from crushed minerals mixed with water, fat, or spit. For brushes, they used their fingers, sticks, bits of chewed-up plant ends, or hollow bones to spread the paint over their stenciled hands. Yes, prehistoric people invented airbrushing long before it was used on motorcycles. Why do they paint it? Nobody knows for sure. Maybe it was storytelling. Maybe spiritual beliefs. Maybe someone just had a talent for composition and no one told them to stop. Some experts who study people believe that this art was connected to hunting rituals. They think that it was a way to bring about success or to pass on knowledge about which animals to chase and which ones to avoid. The artist probably worked by the light of a fire deep inside caves where no one lived. This means they were making art just for the sake of it. It's not about making money or getting more Instagram followers. It's about being human and expressing ourselves in the most intense way possible. Kids probably got involved too. Some caves have tiny handprints in them. This suggests that even very young children were taught how to make their mark, literally. We'll never know who made the first bison sketch, but there's a good chance someone stood behind them, grunting in approval or making unhelpful comments. Amazingly, this art continued to exist long after the huts had rotted and the fire pits crumbled. Those painted animals still look like they're galloping across cave walls. This proves that even 30,000 years ago, humans needed more than just food and shelter. They needed to create. Maybe they just really liked bison. In the past, if you got sick or hurt, it was pretty much down to luck. The dice were made of bone, and most of them were not very good. There were no hospitals, no antibiotics, and definitely no urgent care. If you broke something, cut yourself, or developed a rash, your body would just deal with it. If things went wrong, everyone would gather around your fire and hope it didn't look like it was contagious. There was some medical care, but it was very basic. Early humans probably knew how to use plants to reduce pain or inflammation. People used to chew on bark, roots, or crushed herbs as a kind of medicine. Willow bark, for example, contains salicylic acid, which is the active ingredient in aspirin. So, somewhere in the world, a person who lived a long time ago discovered that if they ate a certain kind of tree, it would help stop them from feeling pain. For wounds, treatment often involved cleaning the area with water or antiseptic plants. If known, wrapping it in animal hide or moss, and then watching it closely. The infection was what really caused the death, not the injury itself. There were no sterile bandages. If the wound turned red, felt hot, and started to smell, that was a sign that something was wrong. It could mean that the bone was broken. Sometimes they got better, sometimes they didn't. There is archaeological evidence of prehistoric skeletons with healed, broken bones, suggesting that care was taken and rest was important. But there were also people who clearly kept moving on bad limbs because they had no other choice. Toothaches were another problem. Teeth got worn down from chewing tough meat and plants full of grit all the time. Cavities weren't very common, but tooth decay and jaw infections did happen. The solution is to remove the stone without using anesthetic. Shamans or medicine people may have been early doctors, herbalists, spiritual guides, and people willing to touch poo. They used rituals, chants, and substances that we might now think were a bit like hallucinogens. Was it science? No. Did it work? Sometimes. The truth is that medical care in the past was a mix of trying things out and using your instinct to survive. You got rest, you got attention, and sometimes you got lucky. If you didn't, your spot by the fire will be given to someone else by nightfall. In the Stone Age, there were no wagons, no wheels, no roads, and no way to catch a ride. If you wanted to go somewhere, you walked. That was it. Travel was not easy. It was a big physical challenge. Whether you were moving camp, following game, or avoiding the neighbors who kept stealing your firewood, it always meant using your own 2 feet. It was very important that they could move around easily. Paleolithic groups were usually nomads. They moved with the seasons, depending on what food was available, and sometimes just to escape the smell of their old camp. Campsites didn't come with long-term contracts. When the local resources were used up or the mammoths moved on, the people followed. Trips could be short, a day's walk to a nearby hunting ground, or much longer, spanning dozens of miles over several days or even weeks. Everything had to be carried. You had to pack up tools, hides, things to start a fire, food, if there was any left, and children. Then you had to carry all of these things on your back. There were no suitcases, just bags made from leather or baskets made from woven reeds. And don't forget the weather. When you travel, you're more likely to get sick. Rain, wind, snow. You put up with it all. Maybe when you're trying to persuade a tired 5-year-old that they really have to keep walking uphill again. People used to navigate using maps. People used memory, landmarks, star patterns, animal tracks, and knowledge passed down through generations. That mountain that looked like a sleeping bear or the bend in the river that smelt funny were as close to street signs as you got. Group movement had to be organized. Scouts might go ahead to check for threats. Everyone else moved carefully, often one after the other. If someone got hurt, the whole group slowed down. If the weather changed, you would find shelter quickly. It was important to be fast, but also important to stay together. If you got lost in the wild in prehistoric times, it was unlikely you would survive. Even so, people covered a lot of ground. Fossils and artifacts show that early humans walked across continents. There was no GPS, water bottles, or Spotify. It was just about survival, sore feet, and the human drive to see what was beyond the next hill. After a long day of hunting, gathering, walking, taking care of their kids, fixing tools, and generally not dying, early humans ended their day in the only place that made sense, around the fire. The sun set quickly, and with no electric lights or lanterns, it got dark very quickly. That's when the group got ready for the last part of the night. It's a mix of winding down and making sure everything is working properly. If you were lucky, dinner was roasted meat, boiled roots, or whatever food hadn't been eaten earlier. Everyone shared their food. They sat in a circle, sometimes on the floor or cross-legged. They ate with their hands or with sticks that were sharpened on one side. There were no official rules of behavior, but there were definitely some unwritten ones. For example, you should only take the last bite if you were the one who caught the fish. After eating, people talked about other things, not just how to survive or get food. They shared stories, myths, memories, and cautionary tales about that one guy who tried to hug a porcupine. Before Netflix, people would tell stories around a campfire. These stories were passed down from one generation to the next, teaching people and entertaining children. They probably exaggerated how good everyone was at hunting by at least 30%. Sometimes there was singing, rhythmic, simple, or calls passed between voices. You can use a piece of bone as a flute, a hollow log, or a drum. The music wasn't perfect, but that didn't matter. It kept the cold at bay for a bit longer. By now, most people were really tired. The day didn't leave much energy for deep talks about big ideas. The children were the first to pass out. They curled up next to their parents or in a pile of furs. Adults spent more time looking into the fire, as if it could tell them something. Or maybe just zoning out. Same thing. Before bed, someone always checked the fire. The person in the group who does not often speak up. If the flames looked low, they were fed more. If the wind changed direction, the barriers were moved to follow. If someone forgot to check, they would hear about it first thing in the morning. In December 1938, two German scientists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Straumann, bombarded uranium with neutrons, and the results were surprising. They hadn't just changed the element, they had split it. Nuclear fission had just been discovered. The news of the experiment spread quickly among the global physics community. And while the implications were still theoretical, one thing was obvious. If we could control fish, we could harness their power, which would be huge. This worried the scientific world, especially in the United States, because Nazi Germany, home to some of the world's best physicists, had just taken the first step towards a doomsday weapon. Leo Szilard, a Hungarian Jew who had fled Europe, understood the situation immediately. If Hitler's scientists built an atomic bomb first, the world would not only lose a war, it might lose its future. Szilard and fellow refugee Albert Einstein wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt. They warned him that the Germans might be working on exactly that. Einstein signed it. The letter was delivered in October 1939, less than 2 months after World War II began. Roosevelt didn't rush into action, but he didn't ignore it either. He also set up a group of experts to advise him on uranium. The money coming in was slow. At first, the United States just wasn't ready to use nuclear physics as a weapon of war. But that would soon change. By 1941, the British had confirmed that the bomb was possible. Japan had attacked Pearl Harbor. The US had joined the war. A concern that was only just there became a race against time. Then General Leslie Groves arrived. He was a practical military man who had just finished building the Pentagon. He was made head of the new Manhattan Engineer District in 1942. Its aim was straightforward: to build an atomic bomb before the Nazis did. In reality, it was the most secretive, expensive, and scientifically complex project ever attempted. Groves brought in a young, theoretical physicist to lead the science, J. Robert Oppenheimer. He was a brilliant, controversial, idealistic man who could calculate particle probabilities and quote Sanskrit poetry. Together, they started what would become known as the Manhattan Project, a $2 billion gamble that would change warfare and the world forever. The Manhattan Project wasn't just a test in a lab. It was an empire. To make the impossible possible, the US government created a whole hidden community spread across the country. This community is kept secret. No one outside the project knew what it was really for. Most of the people inside didn't either. At the center of this secret world were three main sites. First, Los Alamos, New Mexico, a remote, dusty mesa. This would be the most important part of the project, where theoretical physics meets practical engineering. Here, Oppenheimer brought together a group of scientists who were the best in their field: Niels Bohr, Richard Feynman, Enrico Fermi, and many others. Many of these people were European immigrants who were escaping fascism. Some people didn't know what they were building. Second, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where whole factories as long as several football fields were built from the beginning. Their job was to get hold of uranium, one of the two things you need to make an atomic bomb. The problem was that uranium-235 was very rare. It makes up less than 1% of natural uranium. So engineers tried lots of different methods. They tried gaseous diffusion, electromagnetic separation, and even calatrons. Many of the workers, most of whom were women, did not understand how the machines they operated helped to make fuel for bombs. Third, Hanford, Washington, where plutonium was produced. This was the second path to the bomb. Plutonium didn't occur naturally in amounts that could be used, but in huge nuclear reactors built in remote locations. Uranium could be bombarded to produce it. Then it had to be taken out of the rock, cleaned, and sent to Los Alamos to be made into a bomb. The reactors were on 24/7, creating a new element and causing problems. The first nuclear accident happened here. It caused radiation leaks, contamination, and the environmental costs of the nuclear age. More than 130,000 people worked on the Manhattan Project, which is more than the population of some US states at the time. They built secret towns with housing, schools, stores, and security fences. The post was censored. Phone calls were monitored. The workers were only told the things they needed to know. Even Vice President Harry Truman didn't know what the project was about until he became president. This wasn't just a school project. It was industrial, military, bureaucratic, and deeply human. People fell in love, had children, suffered accidents, got bored, and died. They were working on an invention, but they couldn't name it. The project had become a hidden America, and it was getting closer and closer to making the most deadly weapon ever. Robert Oppenheimer was not your typical military contractor. He wasn't a typical scientist. Oppenheimer was a brilliant, strange, aristocratic, and deep thinker. He spoke 6 languages, quoted the Bhagavad Gita, and smoked a lot. He was clever, but also had a sharp tongue and a fragile health. He was also very good at solving theoretical puzzles that other people couldn't solve. To many, he seemed more interested in poetry than physics, but he was the glue that held Los Alamos together when things got tough. Oppenheimer was appointed scientific director of the Manhattan Project by General Groves, and he quickly proved he was more than just an academic. He had a natural talent for understanding people and politics. He could make people loyal to him and deal with difficult personalities. This was no easy task, especially because he was working with some of the smartest people in the world, each of whom had won a Nobel Prize. But he also had a bad side. The military intelligence service was suspicious of Oppenheimer because of his links to members of the Communist Party. These included his brother and his mistress, Jean Tatlock. Groves ignored the objections and decided to proceed with Oppenheimer. However, the file on him was already very long and was getting longer. But Oppenheimer's ability to picture how theoretical physics could be turned into real technology made him vital. At Los Alamos, he led with a mix of charm and obsession, often sleeping just a few hours a night. He'd race between meetings and scribble formulas, argue designs, and smoke a lot. He was at the center of everything. Things like the arrangement of atoms, the design of bomb casings, neutron reflectors, and even the seating plans for meetings. He was also very aware of the possible results of his actions. Oppenheimer thought it was the right thing to do to beat the Nazis to the bomb. But as the war in Europe was coming to an end and Germany's nuclear program was failing, he started to feel worried. The bomb was now used offensively as well as defensively. People were starting to use it as a political tool. This problem kept bothering him. He had called the smartest people of the time together to create a plan to destroy everything. Every success brought them closer to victory, but also closer to a line that could never be crossed back again. But privately, Oppenheimer was still unsure. Out in public, he kept his cool. As the team finished working on the bombs, one scary fact became clearer. This would change warfare forever. They'd be changing the way humanity relates to power. By late 1944, the theory had been replaced by the blueprints. The building plans became parts of the ship. Some parts became prototypes. The Manhattan Project was no longer just an experiment. It was like an assembly line for Armageddon. But making a nuclear bomb was not like making a tank or a plane. This was completely new, and it was difficult. The people working as engineers, machinists, and physicists at Los Alamos were now working on two types of bombs. Each bomb was very complicated. The first was the uranium bomb, nicknamed Little Boy. It used a gun-type mechanism. If you smash one piece of uranium-235 into another one really fast, you'll set off a chain reaction. The idea is simple, but the practice is scary. The enriched uranium came from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, in very small amounts. Each gram took a lot of effort, and they needed over 60 kilograms in total. Every calculation had to be perfect. There would be no test run. Little Boy would go straight to the battlefield. The second bomb, Fat Man, used plutonium. But plutonium was trickier. A gun-type design wouldn't work. Plutonium would start to burn before it could reach full power. They had to come up with a different method. This was called implosion. This meant that precise explosive lenses could compress a plutonium core into a critical mass in a very short time. It was like trying to crush a steel ball evenly from all sides using dynamite without cracking the shell. Plutonium was even worse. It was toxic and unstable and had only just been invented. The scientists worked in secret and under a lot of pressure. Accidents happened. In 1945, a physicist called Harry DeGalian accidentally dropped a tungsten brick into a plutonium core. This caused a critical reaction. He took in a lot of radiation and died a few weeks later. The demon core, as it was called, would kill another scientist, Louis Slotin, months later in an accident that was eerily similar. Every step forward was difficult, but time was running out. Germany had given up. Japan kept fighting, and Washington wanted to see results. The scientists at Los Alamos knew what they were making, but they didn't know where it would go or who it would kill. In the workshops, the final pieces were being put together. Metal casings, precision detonators, nuclear cores. Each part of the machine is amazing. Together, they would create humanity's most deadly invention. The only thing left to do now was to test it. Not in theory, not in simulation, in fire, in desert, in real life. On July 16, 1945, at 5:29 a.m., the New Mexico desert became the site of the first nuclear explosion, marking the start of the nuclear age. The test was called Trinity, and it was the first time a nuclear bomb had ever been exploded. The bomb they tested was a plutonium implosion design, the same type as the Fat Man bomb. It had never been tested before. The scientists thought that little boy would work because of simple physics, but the complex implosion mechanism of Fat Man made it unpredictable. It might not work, it might not be popular, or it might ruin everything around them. Everyone was feeling very tense. Oppenheimer, Groves, and hundreds of scientists met at observation points miles away from where the bomb was detonated. Many wore welding goggles. Some people had sunscreen on their faces, hoping it would protect them from the unknown light that was about to be born. Others took bets on whether the blast would ignite the atmosphere. It sounds ridiculous now, but back then they really weren't sure. At the exact moment of the explosion, the desert was lit up by a flash brighter than the sun. The shockwave knocked people over. You could feel the heat from 10 meters away. A mushroom cloud rose 40,000 feet into the sky. It felt like the earth itself had stopped. One person said that it was there when the world was created. Another said it felt like the gates of hell had opened. Oppenheimer didn't cheer. He quietly said a line from the Bhagavad Gita, a famous poem from India. "Now I am death, the destroyer of worlds." The test was a success, a very successful and scary film. It confirmed that the United States now had a weapon that could destroy entire cities in seconds. But it also marked the start of a big moral crisis. Photographs were taken. The measurements have been recorded. The sand, which looks like glass, is now called trinitite and was formed at the center of the crater. But what people remembered most wasn't the scientific data. There was silence. And the sad realization that humans had reached a point where they could never go back. News of the test was kept secret. President Truman, who was at the Potsdam Conference in Germany at the time, was told this by a coded message. The baby is born. The war was still happening in the Pacific. Japan had not yet surrendered. The United States had the power to destroy everything. People weren't wondering if they would use it. They were asking where and when. Less than a month after the Trinity test, the scary idea became a real thing. The United States had 2 working bombs and a difficult decision to make. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber called Enola Gay took off from Tinian Island. The bomb was called Little Boy. It was made up of uranium. The target was Hiroshima, a city that was important to the military, but also had a lot of civilians living there. The bomb was released at 8:15 a.m. Just 43 seconds later, the sky erupted. The explosion destroyed 5 square miles of the city. The temperature at the epicenter was 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. More than 70,000 people died instantly, vaporized, or crushed. There were fires. Those who survived were burned and blinded, and could only make their way through a landscape of twisted steel and ash. In the following weeks, tens of thousands more died from radiation sickness, injuries, and trauma. The world had never seen destruction like this, but the war continued. Japan's leaders were unsure. Some people wanted to surrender, while others wanted to negotiate. The U.S. thought that the silence meant that the other side was still fighting, so they got ready to attack again. On August 9th, the plutonium bomb, known as the Fat Man, was loaded onto another B-29 boxcar. The main target was Kakura, but the weather meant that this had to be changed. The bomb was dropped over Nagasaki at 11:02 a.m. The shape of the land in Nagasaki meant that the force of the blast was less than it would have been elsewhere, but it was still extremely destructive. Around 40,000 people died immediately. The explosion destroyed factories, homes, and temples. Many more people died from burns, injuries, and radiation in the next few days. Within hours, the Japanese cabinet was in chaos. The emperor himself, Hirohito, got involved. For the first time ever, a Japanese emperor spoke directly to his people, announcing that Japan would give up the war. The war was over, but people were still arguing about it. Did the bombs end the war, or did they lead to something worse? Were they necessary, or just a really bad show of force? Some scientists had asked for a demonstration instead of a city strike. No one listened to what they were saying. Others, like General Groves, felt no remorse at all. The world had entered a new reality, where peace was enforced by the threat of total destruction. The bomb had been used in a military way, but it had also had a moral, philosophical, and spiritual effect. Those questions would be asked again and again for many years to come. It was obvious that the 20th century had ended when two flashes of light appeared. There was a time before the bomb and everything that came after. The mushroom clouds had barely disappeared when the world, and especially those involved, started to try to understand what had just happened. At Los Alamos, the celebrations were quiet. Yes, the bomb had worked. Yes, the war was over. But even the people who had built it were shocked at how much it had destroyed. Photos of bodies that had been burned and cities that had been destroyed reached the laboratories. People started to tell their stories about surviving. Scientists who used to work so hard to create the weapon now find themselves wondering whether it is right or wrong. Many people felt they had unleashed something much bigger than they understood. Oppenheimer was particularly devastated. He used to be the most important person in the Manhattan Project, but now he is a man haunted. After the war, he reportedly told President Truman, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman was disgusted, according to his staff. He later called Oppenheimer a weak scientist. But the ethical problems weren't just with one man. Scientists like Leo Szilard and James Frank asked for nuclear weapons to be made more transparent and controlled internationally. They said that keeping secrets and not checking who has weapons would lead to a competition to develop more weapons. Nobody paid any attention to their reports. Instead, the U.S. increased its control over nuclear research. The Atomic Energy Commission was set up. The Cold War was starting to get less intense. The Soviets had already found out about the Manhattan Project through espionage, and they were trying to build their own bomb. At the same time, many people working on the Manhattan Project, especially those at Oak Ridge and Hanford, began to discover, often for the first time, what they had been a part of. Some people were proud, while others were horrified. The public was also divided. American newspapers were happy about the end of the war. But slowly, I started to see images of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Then there were more questions. Could Japan have surrendered in a different way? Were both bombs necessary? Was this fair, or was it just revenge? Then I had to deal with the reality of the radiation. Those who survived the bombings, known as Hibakusha, suffered burns, cancer, miscarriages, and were stigmatized for the rest of their lives. Research into the effects of the fallout began. The long-term effects weren't just physical. It was something that had been passed down through the generations. Problems with the DNA, birth defects, and mental health problems. The war had ended, but the consequences were just starting. The Manhattan Project had achieved its goal, but also led to a lot of sadness, secrecy, and confusion about what was right and wrong, which would define the nuclear age. Science had made a big breakthrough, but humanity hadn't kept up. While the bomb was being built in secret deserts and hidden labs, it wasn't as secret as the US government had hoped. Even as America celebrated its newfound atomic dominance, its security was already starting to weaken, and Soviet agents had already got through. The Manhattan Project was almost completely compromised from the very start. The USSR knew about the bomb long before it was dropped, thanks to Soviet espionage networks. Some of the scientists working on the project, including Klaus Fuchs, a theoretical physicist working at Los Alamos, were secretly sending information about the weapon's design straight to Moscow. Fuchs's information was so precise that Soviet engineers later admitted they used his data as a template when building their own bomb. He wasn't alone. Julius and Ethel Rosenberg were American civilians who had connections to communism. They were accused of sharing information about the atomic bomb with the Soviet Union. The trial and execution of these men in 1953 shocked the nation and became one of the most controversial episodes in Cold War history. People still don't know if they were just scapegoats or real traitors, but the message was obvious. The nuclear genie was out of the bottle and no longer controlled by just one country. The Soviet Union exploded its first atomic bomb in 1949, just 4 years after the bomb was used on Hiroshima. It was faster than most American officials had expected. The world was now a place with many nuclear weapons, and the competition to develop more of them was officially started. America had been the only country with the ability to cause total destruction for less than 5 years. What happened next was a new kind of warfare, not involving bullets, but where both sides were very cautious. Nations now had weapons that could destroy entire cities with just one strike. The way they thought about the conflict changed. When it no longer meant having more soldiers. It meant working out who could survive a nuclear attack, or who could launch a more deadly one in response. Back in the US, people started to worry more and more. Loyalty oaths, background checks, whack hearings, the Red Scare. Scientists who had been praised as heroes in their country were now accused, blacklisted, and questioned. Oppenheimer, the man who created the bomb, was stripped of his security clearance in a very embarrassing hearing that showed just how much the political situation had changed. The bomb had won a war, but it had also started a new one. This new war was colder, more psychological, and much more dangerous. A new era had begun, from the labs of Los Alamos to the Siberian gulags. It was a place where there was always silence, people were always suspicious, and there was always someone watching. The threat of being completely destroyed was always very real. The Manhattan Project ended in 1946, but it had a lasting impact. It changed the world in scientific, military, political, and moral ways. This was the start of the modern era. On the one hand, the project was a huge step forward for science. It showed that theoretical physics could affect what happens all over the world, and that research could be turned into real power. The same ideas that split atoms would later be used to make nuclear energy, explore space, and improve medicine. Nuclear physics has become a key part of modern science, but it also made things worse for humanity. The invention of nuclear weapons didn't just end a war. It changed what peace meant. For the first time ever, humans had made something that could destroy itself. That scary possibility has been a concern in every international conflict since then. The idea of mutually assured destruction was the key part of Cold War diplomacy. Two superpowers, both with lots of weapons, were stuck in a situation where if either one of them fired, it would mean the end of civilization. The Manhattan Project also led to a global arms race. The US, the Soviet Union, then Britain, France, China, India, Pakistan, Israel, but not officially, and later North Korea each developed their own bombs. What started as a last-ditch attempt to stop Nazi Germany turned out to be a model for the spread of militaries around the world. And yet, despite how bad it is, The bomb has only ever been used in war twice. This fact is both scary and amazing. It suggests a contradiction. The bomb is the ultimate weapon, and the fact that it is so scary might be the reason it has not been used again. The Manhattan Project had a big impact on American culture. In film, literature, and philosophy, it made us think about the limits of progress. Could science exist without conscience? Could knowledge be separated from responsibility? People like Oppenheimer are still symbols of this problem. They are not villains or heroes, but normal people who are torn between being smart and feeling bad about what they have done and wanting to achieve more. In 1965, he had a kind of basic understanding of things that can't be fully described with rude words, humor, or exaggeration. Scientists who study physics have known sin. Today, the legacy of the Manhattan Project can still be seen in stockpiles of weapons, non-proliferation treaties, a climate of deterrence, and the uneasy peace that nuclear fear enforces. The bomb ended the First World War, but it also started something else. We are in a time that is always going to be a bit risky, where the world's future can depend on pressing a button. In ancient Mesopotamia, what you wore was more than just a way to cover your body. It was about broadcasting your identity. Your clothes reflected your social class, job, gender, and how close you were to the gods. Everyone from priests to kings to slaves had to follow the rules of fashion. The earliest civilizations in Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, and Assyria all had different clothing hierarchies. For men, clothes included simple skirts made of wool or flax, and long, elaborately fringed robes. These robes showed which group of people they belonged to. The more layers, pleats, and embroidery, the more powerful you were thought to be. Royalty and nobility often wore cloaks dyed with expensive pigments. These included deep reds, purples, and indigos. These pigments were made from rare minerals and plants. These dyes weren't just pretty, they were expensive to make, so wearing them showed that you were rich and important. Women's clothing was also symbolic. The best women wore beautiful, thin gowns that went across their body at an angle and left one shoulder showing. Decorative fringes along the hems were a common feature. Jewelry was very important. Gold necklaces, lapis lazuli earrings, and carnelian beads were used not only to enhance beauty, but to signify divine favor or aristocratic lineage. Bracelets, anklets, and hairpieces were also important. They showed a person's spiritual beliefs and marital status. Even how they wore their hair was planned. Mesopotamian men took pride in their beards, which were curled, oiled, and sometimes crimped into intricate patterns. Beards were more than just a form of facial hair. They were seen as a sign of being a good man. Women, meanwhile, wore their hair in different styles, like buns, braids, and elaborate rolls. Both men and women wore wigs on special occasions or to show that they were upper class. The perfumes and cosmetics added the last layer. Oils scented with myrrh or cedar were commonly used to perfume the skin. Women wore on makeup, often kohl, not only to look beautiful, but also to protect themselves against evil spirits and the sun. And let's not forget shoes or the lack of them. Most people in Mesopotamia didn't wear shoes, but rich people sometimes wore sandals made of leather or even silver just for special events. In Mesopotamia, fashion was not just for fun. It was very practical, important, and supported by religious and political organizations. What you wore could make you look good or bad. Even 5,000 years ago, people knew that appearances weren't everything. They were meant to be. In ancient Egypt, fashion was seen as having a religious role. What you wore didn't just show how rich or stylish you were. It showed your connection to the gods. Clothing was all about purity, power, and timeless style. In a land where life and death were closely connected, your clothes had to be suitable for this world and the next one. Linen was the most important material. Made from flax, it was the main fabric worn by all Egyptians. It was soft, lightweight, and perfect for the hot desert. But not all linen was the same quality. The upper class wore fine, almost see-through linen that clung to the body in elegant folds. Pharaohs and nobles wore pleated kilts and robes with fancy sashes, often starched and shaped to look dramatic. The whiter and finer the linen, the more it was seen as a sign of purity and favor with the gods. For women, fashion was both sensual, related to sex, and symbolic, related to meaning. The best women wore tight dresses called calisseras. These were often supported with straps across the shoulders. These dresses showed off a lot of the body. But in Egyptian culture, beauty and fertility were seen as the most important qualities. Clothing was designed to highlight the natural shape of the body. The goal wasn't to make people modest. Harmony and beauty were very important. Jewelry was more than just something to wear. It was spiritual armor. Amulets shaped like scarabs, ankhs, and eyes of Horus were common. Gold was the preferred metal of the gods, who were believed to never decay. Both men and women wore necklaces called the broad collar or wesk. These necklaces were worn on top of other necklaces and were decorated with precious stones, turquoise, lapis lazuli, and carnelian. These weren't just pretty. They offered protection and favor from the gods. Wigs were a common choice of clothing for elites every day. While most Egyptians shaved their heads for hygiene and to avoid lice, wigs made of human hair or plant fibers showed a person's rank and beauty. Some were huge, intricately braided, and perfumed with cones of scented wax that melted in the heat, releasing fragrance throughout the day. Makeup was essential. Kohl eyeliner wasn't just stylish. It protected the eyes from the sun's bright light and was believed to keep away bad spirits. Both men and women wore green eyeshadow and red lipstick. Looking good was important because the gods were always watching. From pyramid workers to priests to queens, what you wore in Egypt wasn't just about fashion. It was a very important statement about who you are, your soul, and your journey into the afterlife. At first, ancient Greek fashion might seem simple. The fabric is soft, the seams are minimal, and the lines are clean. But if you look more closely, you'll see a world full of different identities, social classes, and civic values. In Greece, especially in the classical period, clothing wasn't about extravagance. It was about order, proportion, and philosophy. Greek garments were usually made from rectangular pieces of wool or linen. These were draped and pinned instead of being cut or tailored. The most famous outfit was the chiton, a tunic that was fastened at the shoulders and belted at the waist. Men's chitons were usually knee-length, while women's reached the ankles. But even that length was a message. Long chitons on men were a sign of youth or priesthood, while short ones were a sign of being athletic, working class, or in the military. Both men and women might wear a hymation over the chiton. This is a large cloak draped over one shoulder. Philosophers famously wore it tightly wrapped, creating a serious look that matched their calm beliefs. The hymation became a quiet way of showing that people were smart and good citizens. Women also wore the peplos, a heavier woolen garment folded over at the top, creating a double layer across the torso. This fold, called the apoptygma, was both decorative and symbolic. It showed modesty and femininity, which were very important ideas in Athenian society. The way a woman wore her peplo could indicate whether she was married, in mourning, or if she was observing a religious festival. The color was there, but it wasn't too obvious. White was associated with purity and ceremony. People wore dark clothes in the morning. Saffron yellow and rich purples were used during special rituals or in elite households, but they were rare and expensive. The patterns were simple, but the geometric shapes and embroidery on the edges added visual interest and showed that the person wearing it was part of a higher social group. The hair and accessories were chosen carefully. Men often kept their hair short, while women's hairstyles varied a lot. Braids, buns, and curls were all popular. The jewelry was elegant but simple. Gold earrings, hairpins with lots of detail, and bracelets shaped like snakes or leaves. You didn't have to wear shoes. Many Greeks didn't wear shoes at home or during special events. When they did wear shoes, it was usually simple leather sandals or soft boots. The form follows the function. Greek fashion was all about elegance and discipline. In a society that was obsessed with balance and virtue, the way a tunic or a sash was tied wasn't just about how it looked. It showed how people lived, thought, and contributed to society. If the Greeks used fashion to express their beliefs, the Romans used it to show who was in charge. Roman clothing was bold, regulated, and highly symbolic. It was designed to show the empire's strict social hierarchy and its love for spectacle and control. What you wore in Rome wasn't just a personal choice. It was often the law. The most well-known Roman garment was the toga, and it wasn't for comfort. The toga was a special robe that was worn by Roman men, especially the rich and powerful. It was made of wool and was shaped like half of a circle. It was worn over the body and was worn very carefully. It needed to be worn properly, either by practice or a personal slave. The color, size, and decorative stripe of your toga immediately showed your status. Adult male citizens wore a plain white toga virilis. A toga praetexta with a purple border was worn by magistrates and high-ranking boys. The fully purple toga pica, decorated with gold, was worn only by generals in special parades and later by emperors. If you were the wrong toga, it could make you look bad in front of other people or even get you into more trouble. Men wore a simple, knee-length garment called a tuna underneath, which was belted at the waist. Slaves wore plain, unwashed tunics. Freedmen might wear striped clothes to show that they had a new, but not full, status. The senators had a purple stripe called a clarvis that went down the front. In Rome, fashion wasn't about being different. It was about knowing your place. Roman women, meanwhile, wore the stole, a long, flowing dress. They often wore the pau, a shawl that could cover their heads when they went out in public. Well-respected women wore distinctive stole as a sign of their chastity and virtue. But prostitutes weren't allowed to wear them. There's a clear difference between dignity and shame in the fashion world. Jewelry was worn by almost everyone, especially women. Rings, necklaces, fibula, brooches, and earrings were not just for show. They were used as money, to show status, and as political gifts. Rich women wore fancy hairstyles, often with lots of curls, braids, and pins. This took a lot of time and needed a mirror and several servants. People wore all kinds of shoes, from simple sandals to leather boots that were dyed red, green, or black. Senators even had their own type of shoe, called calcas. These shoes had a black leather finish and laces that went all the way around the ankle. In ancient Rome, clothing was a combination of law, art, and propaganda. The right clothes represented Rome's values, discipline, hierarchy, conquest, and pride in their city. A toga was more than just a piece of fabric. It was the Roman Republic wrapped in wool. In the Persian Empire, fashion was like a grand show. From Darius the Great to Xerxes, Persian rulers dressed not just to impress, but to intimidate. When a Persian nobleman walked into a room, it was like seeing a jewel box shining with embroidered silks, gold decorations, and religious images. The clothes here were about power and ideas about the universe. Persians liked to use bright colors and beautiful materials, which was different from the simple style of the Greeks. Silk, which reached Persia via early trade routes, was a luxury that only the elite could afford. Embroidery was very important. Tunics and robes were heavily decorated with gold thread, pictures of animals, and patterns that symbolized fertility, protection, and divine favor. The more detailed your garment was, the higher your position was, and the closer your aura was to the king. Men usually wore long-sleeved tunics with trousers underneath, which was new for the time. Other ancient societies wore robes, but Persians started wearing trousers, which were both practical and fashionable. It was revolutionary and would later influence Greek, Roman, and even medieval clothing. A wide, decorative belt was often used to fasten the tunic at the waist, and layered cloaks draped over the shoulders, adding weight and formality to the outfit. Women's fashion was also sophisticated, but more modest. Long dresses with fitted bodices and lots of layers of fabric were common, as well as wide sleeves and veils. There was lots of jewelry, gold necklaces, bracelets made of gemstones, and rings with intricate carvings. Perfume and cosmetics also featured heavily. Women wore rouge, kohl eyeliner, and scented oils in beautiful white jars. Hats were very important. The tiara, or keris, is a tall pointed hat that is often decorated with pearls or embroidery. It was a symbol of Persian royalty. Even the lower-ranked servants wore embroidered caps or turbans to show that they were loyal to the king. The more elaborate your headgear, the closer you were to the throne. Colors also had meaning. Deep blues and purples were the colors worn by royalty and high nobility. White was the color of purity and was often worn by priests during religious ceremonies. Red and gold were symbols of fire, which was considered sacred in Zoroastrianism, the main religion in Persia. When it came to Persian fashion, everything was thought out. Every fold, every gem, every stitched griffin or lion carried a message. The universe is organized. The king is like a god. You know where you fit in based on your clothes. In ancient India, fashion was seen as a form of art that was closely connected to religion, the climate, and the balance of the universe. From the Vedic period through to the Maurya and Gupta empires, Indian clothing reflected a deep philosophical way of thinking. Texture, color, and the way clothes hung and moved were not just about looking nice. They were also seen as holy. The most important part of ancient Indian fashion was unstitched cloth. Instead of making clothes to fit the body, they were wrapped, folded, and draped in different ways that meant different things in different parts of the country. This wasn't a shortcut, it was a principle. In Hindu beliefs, stitching was sometimes seen as a form of impurity for clothing used in religious rituals. So, flowing fabrics became the way to express yourself and show your spiritual identity. For men, the most common garment was the dhoti, which was a rectangular piece of cloth, often white or saffron, wrapped around the waist and tied in a knot. It could be formal or casual, and the way it was folded was different in different areas and depending on the type of casting. Priests, for example, wore it in specific ways that matched the religious ceremonies. Women wore the sari, which is still famous today, but in ancient times, it looked quite different. It was usually a piece of cloth up to 9 yards long, wrapped around the waist with one end and the other draped over the shoulder or head. It left the midriff exposed, not as a fashion statement, but as a sign of fertility and a sense of the universe. In many temples, goddesses were decorated in this exact style, which reflected the sacred femininity of the land. The blouse worn under a sari appeared later. In the past, the things people wore to cover their upper bodies varied a lot, depending on what was normal in their society and what the weather was like. In some areas, especially in southern India, women wore the sari without a blouse at all. In colder regions, they added shawls and veils. Textiles were India's most valuable export. Cotton was first cultivated here, and Indian weavers became very skilled at techniques like block printing, resist dyeing, and fine spinning. The muslin of Bengal was so delicate that it was called woven air. Silk was also a very important material for royal and religious clothes, especially in Buddhism and Jainism. Everyone wore jewelry. This included necklaces, bangles, anklets, and nose rings. Each piece had a meaning linked to astrology, spirituality, or marriage. Even children wore amulets to protect them from evil. In ancient India, people did not follow fashion trends that often changed. It was a way of life, soft and ever-changing, with many layers of meaning and always connected to the divine. In ancient China, fashion was about more than just looking good. It was a way of life that combined ethics, ideas about the universe, and the structure of government. No matter what dynasty you were from, Shang, Zhou, or Han, the clothes you wore showed how important you were, how in tune you were with the universe, and how you felt about the emperor. The most well-known type of clothing in the early history of China was the hanfu, a robe that flows, with wide sleeves, a collar that is crossed, and a sash at the waist. It wasn't just a fashion staple. It was a perfect example of Confucian beliefs. Modesty, structure, and respect for hierarchy were sewn into every pleat. Men and women wore hanfu, but there were big differences in the details, color, fabric, trim, and length based on class, age, and the occasion. Colors were strictly controlled. During the Zhou dynasty, color codes were created to match the 5 elements philosophy. The colors are as follows: yellow for earth, center; red for fire, south; blue; green for wood, east; white for metal, west; and black for water, north. The color yellow was especially important and was only used by the emperor. Wearing it as a commoner was an insult to the throne. The most important thing was layering. Nobles and scholars wore many layers of robes, not just to keep warm or look good, but as a sign of their high status. The more layers you add, the higher your rank will be. The peasants wore simple tunics made of hemp or coarse wool. They tied these at the waist with trousers or leggings. Silk was only for the upper class until its production spread to more people centuries later. Women's clothing varied, but was usually similar to the hanfu style, with extra sashes, flowing skirts, and fancy hairpins. Hair was always styled with care. It was kept long and was often pinned up. It was often decorated with jade combs, gold ornaments, or flowers. The more complex and elaborate the hairstyle, the more refined it is considered to be. Women were expected to keep their hair tied up in public. Accessories were important. Jade was seen as the stone of immortality and virtue. Pendants carved with dragons, phoenixes, or clouds were symbols of good luck and moral strength. Even shoes had codes. The pointed tips and high heels made the shoes look fancy, not normal. In ancient China, fashion was all about finding the right fabrics. It reflected the natural order, expressed human dignity, and upheld the invisible structure of the empire. Dressing properly wasn't just about being polite. It was a civic and spiritual duty. The fashion of the Celtic and Germanic tribes was wild, impractical, and savage. But for the people who wore it, their clothing was more than just practical. It was very expressive. Tribal dress showed warrior culture, family ties, spiritual beliefs, and a love for bold identities. Where Mediterranean fashion focused on order and hierarchy, the so-called barbarians embraced individuality and flair. Let's start with the Celts. Celtic people lived in Gaul, the British Isles, and some parts of Central Europe. They wore brightly colored wool clothes, often dyed with natural pigments from plants and minerals. Patterns were very important. Plaid and check patterns were more than just for decoration. They were used to identify different groups of people. Each area or group had its own preferred style long before Scotland's tartan system was created. Men usually wore long-sleeved tunics belted at the waist with trousers known as bracca. This is very different to the clothing worn in ancient Rome or Greece. These trousers were warm, flexible, and perfect for horseback riding and combat. Warriors often went in a battle without shirts on, covered in tattoos or blue war paint made from weed. This was to intimidate the enemy and to mark out a sacred ritual. Celtic women wore dresses or skirts that were layered on top of each other. They also wore shawls or cloaks. These were fastened by elaborate brooches called fibulae. People wore lots of jewelry. There are thick neck rings called torques, bangles, spiral earrings, and amber beads. These items weren't just for show. They marked wealth, tribal role, and sometimes even protection from the mystical. Hair was another way of making a statement. Both men and women braided or coiled their hair, and sometimes they bleached it with lime to make it look more dramatic. Long mustaches and beards were popular with men, especially warriors and chieftains. Meanwhile, Germanic tribes, from the Goths to the Saxons, had similar clothing strategies. Tunics, wool cloaks, and furs worn in layers were the main items in their wardrobes. Animal hides, often worn as capes or trimmed with teeth and claws, were both status symbols and talismans. Metal work on belts, clasps, and weapons often featured designs of wolves, boars, and eagles. These creatures are thought to have special powers. Roman historians said these tribal fashions were uncivilized, but they were important to the people who wore them. They emphasized mobility, identity, and a spiritual connection to the land and ancestors. In a world full of people moving around a lot and fighting, what you wore was your flag, your shield, and your stories, all sewn into wool, leather, and bone. By the time the Roman Empire changed into the Byzantine Empire, fashion had become something completely different. It was a mix of Roman authority, Eastern luxury, and Christian symbols. In Byzantium, clothing wasn't just about status or wealth. It was a holy language. Every thread, every jewel, and every embroidered icon was part of a religious and political performance. The Byzantine court was obsessed with ceremonial dress. The emperor was seen as God's representative on earth and wore clothes that were so fancy and decorated they looked almost like something from a theater. His robes, known as the loros, were long, jewel-studded bands that wrapped elaborately around the body. Gold thread was common. Pearls, sapphires, and garnets were sewn directly into the fabric. When you saw the emperor, you saw a living icon. The color of the buildings was strictly controlled. The imperial family was the only one allowed to use purple, which was made from a rare type of snail. Anyone else caught wearing it could face severe punishment. Even small accents of purple on robes or shoes showed a connection to the throne. Senators, religious leaders, and army officers had their own color codes and uniform-like outfits for important ceremonies. The clothes worn in Byzantium were simple and worn in layers. Both men and women wore tunics called dalmatica. These had wide sleeves and embroidered bands known as clarvae running vertically down the front. They wore cloaks like the chlamys, fastened with decorative brooches, often shaped like crosses or doves. These layers weren't just practical. They showed the religious values of humility and respect. Women's fashion in Byzantium was both luxurious and religious. The most important women wore long robes with tight sleeves, silk that was heavily decorated, and complicated head coverings. Veils and crowns were worn to show that a woman was both pious and powerful. There was lots of jewelry, heavy earrings, multi-strand necklaces, and golden belts adorned with religious icons and saints. Even their shoes were embroidered. Christianity had a big impact on everything. Symbols like crosses, angels, and sacred words appeared on belts, pins, and the edges of clothes. Churches were filled with mosaics showing saints and royalty wearing beautiful robes. Fashion that has become famous through art. Even outside the palace, people dressed in a way that showed their position in the social order. People like merchants, scholars, monks, and servants all wore clothes that were clearly defined. You didn't just dress for the weather. You dressed for your role in God's plan. In Byzantium, fashion wasn't a choice. It was meant to be, sanctified by scripture and stitched in silk. Your robe was more than just a piece of clothing. It was your gospel. Before glasses were invented, people with poor vision often had a hard life and serious problems. If you were nearsighted, reading or doing detailed work like craftsmanship became almost impossible. If you were farsighted, sewing, carving, or copying manuscripts was a daily struggle. But for most of human history, there was no solution. People just accepted it. In the past, people from ancient civilizations knew about problems with their vision, but they didn't have the technology to fix them. The earliest written reference to impaired vision comes from ancient Egypt. Medical papyrus from as early as 1500 BC describes symptoms that sound a lot like presbyopia, which is age-related farsightedness. However, treatment was mostly magical or herbal. There is no sign of optical devices. The Greeks and Romans also understood that eyesight can get worse over time. Seneca the Younger is said to have used a glass globe filled with water to make text bigger. It worked like a basic magnifying lens, but you couldn't wear it. The first true magnifying lenses were invented during the Islamic Golden Age. Scholars in Baghdad and Cairo were experimenting with optics as early as the 9th century. The mathematician Al-Hazen, also known as Ibn Alam, wrote a book on optics in the 11th century, which laid the groundwork for the science of vision. He explained how light enters the eye and how lenses can bend it. But there is no record of wearable lenses. Instead, ancient and medieval readers used what were known as reading stones. These were polished hemispheres of glass or crystal placed directly over the text to make it bigger. These tools were first used in Europe and the Middle East around the 10th or 11th century. They were useful, but a bit awkward. You had to press them against the page, and they only helped with one line at a time. The real revolution happened in the late 13th century in northern Italy, probably in the craftspeople's centers of Pisa or Venice. It was here that people started making the first pair of glasses, turning magnifying lenses from tools that you couldn't take with you into something you could wear, and that changed your life. These early glasses weren't stylish, but they were revolutionary. For the first time in history, people with poor eyesight could still become scholars or artisans. The earliest eyeglasses had convex lenses that helped people with presbyopia, a condition where it's hard to see things up close because your eyes are not working well together. These were not mass-produced. Each pair was made by skilled glass makers and mounted in simple frames made of wood, bone, leather, or metal. There were no temples. These lenses were balanced on the nose or pinched together, sometimes held by hand. The earliest written reference is from 1306, when a Dominican friar named Giordano Deppa told his congregation that it was not yet 20 years since the art of making eyeglasses was discovered. This means that the invention must have happened around the 1280s. Venetian glassmakers, who were already experts in making fine crystal, played a key role. They worked in Murano, an island where people make glass. This work led to lenses that were clearer and more uniform. It wasn't long before monks, copyists, and old scholars started using glasses as a useful tool. These early spectacles weren't personalized. There were no eye exams. Buyers simply tested out lenses to see which one helped the most. People didn't understand why some people can't see things that are far away. so they didn't invent glasses for seeing far away for another few hundred years. But the cultural impact was huge. In a society that valued learning, literacy, and religious scholarship, eyeglasses gave older people a new lease of life. Monks could continue copying texts. Doctors could read diagrams of the human body. Artists could keep painting small details. Getting older no longer meant becoming useless. The inventions spread quickly across Europe, mostly among religious leaders and the educated elite. Glasses were expensive and many people were illiterate, so not many people used them. But people found out about them really quickly. By the early 14th century, glasses had reached Germany, France, and England. A simple tool, made up of two lenses in a frame, had changed the course of human productivity. For the first time, people could still see. It was a problem with a solution. In the 14th and 15th centuries, glasses started to be used by people outside of monasteries as Europe's middle class grew. Spectacles were invented at the same time as more people started to learn to read and write, and more people started to trade and live in cities. And so, glasses changed from being a rare tool used by scholars to something that everyone could buy. They became smaller, lighter, and more useful every day. Thanks to the growth of towns and guilds, more people were learning to read. This included merchants, artisans, and bureaucrats. Reading contracts, ledgers, and inventories required good close-up vision. Presbyopia, the most common problem that people use glasses for, is no longer something that older professionals are affected by. In a world focused on writing and maths, glasses were a key part of the economic growth. By the 15th century, people were selling glasses in shops, on the street, and even at fairs. These were basic models, with simple convex lenses attached to wire or horn frames. The frames were held in place by pinching the nose or tying cords around the head. They weren't comfortable, but they worked. For many, it was the first time they could see what their world was really like. In 1450, Johannes Gutenberg's printing press changed everything. All of a sudden, books could be made by the hundreds and then by the thousands. When lots of printed material arrived in Europe, lots of people wanted glasses. The number of people who can read and write went up a little, and so did the need for eye tests. Glasses became more than just a tool for learning. They became important for the new information age. People started making glasses in different ways. In Nuremberg, Germany, spectacle makers formed one of the first dedicated groups by the late 15th century. Lenses were also made in Venice and Florence. These early opticians used special glasses that were made with high-quality glass and were well made. They did not do eye exams, but they did make glasses with lenses that had different strengths. Buyers would just try out different lenses at market stalls to find one that suited them. People also started to think differently about glasses and how they affected social interactions. In the past, glasses were seen as a symbol of intelligence and age. Renaissance paintings often showed saints, scholars, or apostles wearing glasses. In the Renaissance, glasses were seen as a symbol of wisdom and spiritual focus. But as more people from the middle class started to wear them, glasses also became a sign of being able to read and write, being professional, and being good at business. Eyeglasses were no longer just for the elite. They were becoming more radical, useful, widespread, and essential. The 17th century was a time of big changes in how people thought about sight. It wasn't just about being practical anymore. It was about physics. This was the time of Galileo, Kepler, and Newton, men who not only looked at the stars, but also studied the science behind how light and lenses work. Their discoveries changed astronomy and optics forever, turning glasses from ordinary items to scientific instruments. Johannes Kepler's work in 1604 AD was the start of modern optics. He was the first to explain how convex and concave lenses can help you see better. He explained the difference between myopia, nearsightedness, and hyperopia, farsightedness. For the first time, scientists could understand how eyeglass lenses work by studying how light is refracted, not just by trying different methods and seeing what worked. Meanwhile, Galileo used special lenses to build the first practical telescope. Others used similar methods to make microscopes. These developments turned simple reading lenses into tools for exploring the universe and the invisible. The same glass that had helped someone read a book was now helping humans read the stars and the cells. This new understanding of optics had a big effect on people who made glasses. As opticians learned more about focal lengths and lens curvature, they started making more precise corrective lenses. The profession was starting to become more professional. People who made spectacles in London, Paris, and Amsterdam started calling themselves opticians. This word comes from science, not just trade. The glasses also got a few small upgrades. While many were still uncomfortable and narrow, some started to include leather nose pads, riveted hinges, or short handles known as temples. This is how people used to attach glasses more tightly in the past. In China, people already wore glasses with silk cords tied around the ears, and Europeans slowly started to wear similar glasses. Another big change was that concave lenses for nearsightedness became more common. In the past, glasses only helped people who were farsighted. As we learned more about vision problems, we found better ways to fix them. For the first time, a young person who was nearsighted could wear glasses to see clearly from far away. This meant that more people could wear glasses, not just old people and students. By the end of the 1600s, glasses had entered a new era. They weren't just practical, they were a sign of a new way of thinking. Eyeglasses were invented to help people see better. They were also invented because people were curious, and because more and more people were learning to read and write. From now on, improving eyesight would be a matter of science, not just chance. By the 18th century, glasses were not only easier to get, they had also started to become popular. Spectacles were no longer just for scholars and tradesmen. They became popular in salons, courts, and coffee houses too. The Enlightenment was a time when reason and refinement were important. This meant that being smart was fashionable, and so were the tools that showed you were smart. The design of the frame got much better. The awkward nose, pinched contraptions of the Middle Ages are a thing of the past. They were replaced by temple spectacles, which are glasses with arms that extend over the ears, similar to what we wear today. These glasses were invented around the 1720s. They made glasses far more stable and comfortable, especially for everyday use. They were sometimes joined at the ends, sometimes made of bendy wire, and often wrapped in silk or ribbon for extra color. We used a variety of materials. The frames were made from materials like tortoiseshell, horn, silver, and gold. The rich could have special glasses made with their names or jewels on them. While function was still important, form was becoming just as important. Well-known people helped make glasses more common. Benjamin Franklin, perhaps the most famous bespectacled man of the era, not only wore them, but also made them better. In the 1780s, he invented bifocals, which let him see both close-up and far away without having to switch glasses. It was a practical innovation that had a lasting impact. At the same time, glasses that you can take with you became popular. The quizzing glass, which is a single magnifying lens with a handle, became popular as a fashion accessory among the upper class, especially in Britain and France. People would wear them on a chain around their neck and use them at parties, less for correcting their vision and more to show off how clever, rich, or curious they were. Then came the lorgnette, a pair of spectacles with a handle popular among aristocratic women. You could easily open it and hold it up to read or watch an opera performance. For many people, it wasn't just about being able to see clearly. It was about being seen. In the 18th century, glasses became a sign of being smart and well-bred, and even a way to flirt. Spectacles were no longer just a sign of getting old or being weak. They had become part of the fashion world. They now framed more than eyes. They created a sense of who people were. In the 19th century, spectacles became commonplace. The Industrial Revolution brought about big changes, not just steam engines at factories, but also a total transformation in how glasses were made, sold, and worn. What started as small-scale production of accessories for a select group has now become large-scale manufacturing of everyday items for everyone. Before industrialization, glasses were mostly made by hand, one pair at a time. But new machines allowed them to make lenses and frames in large quantities. Cutting glass, shaping metal, and grinding lenses became faster and more precise. This meant more people could afford glasses, and more could finally see clearly. By the mid-1800s, you could buy glasses from general stores and even by mail order. You no longer needed to visit an optician. Instead, people would test pre-made lenses on their own, trying on different strengths until they found one that worked. While this wasn't the same as having your own eye doctor, it made eye care much more available to everyone. There were also more frame styles. People started using steel, nickel, and celluloid, an early type of plastic, instead of horn or tortoise shell, as they were cheaper. The classic parnet, a type of glasses without any sides, was popular with both intellectuals and fashion-conscious men. At the same time, round wire-rimmed glasses, which would later become famous worn by people like Gandhi and John Lennon, were worn by professionals and students. For the first time, glasses for children were sold in shops. As more people started to go to school and more people learned to read and write, more and more children needed to have their eyes checked. Teachers and parents started to understand that not being able to read a blackboard or book might not be because of laziness. It might just be that you're nearsighted. People also learned more about how the eye works. The study of eye health and disease became a proper science, and eye exams began to be done in the same way. In 1862, German eye doctor Hermann Snellen invented the Snellen chart. The well-known wall chart with rows of shrinking letters changed how we measure vision. At the same time, glasses started to be seen as acceptable in public. In the past, many people hid the fact that they needed glasses because they felt embarrassed. But in the 19th century, wearing glasses became a sign of seriousness, education, and respectability in the middle class. Glasses were practical, but also professional. By the start of the 20th century, the world was much clearer than it had ever been before. Glasses could be seen everywhere, in classrooms, factories, courtrooms, and newspapers. People could see things in a way they never had before, and for the first time, lots of people could see things in the same way. At the start of the 20th century, glasses were more than just a way to see better. They had a big cultural impact. This was the century where fashion met science, where glasses became as personal as fingerprints, and where style met identity. It was also the start of a competition to create better and better technology for looking at things, which would decide how eye care would be provided in the future. In the early 1900s, wire-rimmed glasses were still popular, especially with intellectuals and professionals. But mass production kept on improving, and so new styles, shapes, and materials were created. By the 1920s and 1930s, new materials like celluloid and other plastics allowed for bolder frames, giving rise to more expressive eyewear. Thick black rims became a symbol of confidence and authority. People didn't try to hide their glasses anymore. They were something to show off. Hollywood was very important. Actors like Harold Lloyd, who wore round glasses with horns on the sides, made glasses part of how they looked. Later, famous actors and actresses like Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, and Audrey Hepburn wore glasses both in films and in real life. glasses that made them stand out, not hide their impairments. During World War II, there was a lot of innovation. The military wanted better lenses, so companies started making them stronger, using special coatings to stop them reflecting light and making them lighter. The military also gave all soldiers the same glasses, called GI glasses, or less politely, birth control glasses. These weren't very nice, but they were strong and easy to get to. In 1958, there was a big change. The invention of plastic lenses. They are lighter and safer than glass and have completely changed what it means to be comfortable. Glasses became more popular for everyday use when photochromic lenses were developed. These lenses darken in sunlight. Then contact lenses were invented. Soft contact lenses were invented earlier, but they weren't sold in shops until the 1950s and 1960s. People suddenly had a choice. You can wear glasses or not. At the same time, fashion became much more popular. In the 1960s, cat-eye frames and colors inspired by modern fashion were all the rage. In the 1970s, big sunglasses called oversized aviators were all the rage. The 80s were all about making big, bold statements. Picture people like Run DMC and executives from Wall Street. In the 1990s, minimalist styles made a comeback. Rimless and wireframe glasses were all the rage in boardrooms and universities. Eyeglasses were more than just tools for seeing. They were political, smart, and rebellious. Whether you were a poet in Greenwich Village or a computer programmer in Silicon Valley, your glasses told people something about who you were. The 20th century changed how we think about vision. In the 21st century, glasses went from being just for seeing things in the real world to being used in the digital world too. We started using screens all the time, on our desks, in our pockets, and even on our wrists. This made our eyes hurt. So, glasses had to change again. Glasses went from being a medical device to a fashion item to a high-tech necessity. Now, they're smarter, lighter, and more personalized than ever before. One of the most important developments has been the rise of digital lens crafting. In the past, lenses were made based on preset prescriptions. Now, modern glasses are shaped using computer technology to ensure a precise fit. This means that you can get lenses that are exactly the right size for your eyes, no matter how they are shaped. Lenses that help you see both close up and far away have got better a lot. And now they don't make your eyes feel dizzy anymore. Another new feature is blue light blocking technology. As people started spending 8, 10, or even 12 hours a day looking at screens, there are more and more reports of digital eye strain. Some common symptoms are dry eyes, headaches, and blurred vision. This became the new normal. Lens companies develop coatings that filter out high-energy blue light. This reduces eye fatigue and improves sleep for some users. The science might not be conclusive, but demand has shot up. Technology used to create frames also got better. Glasses are made more durable and comfortable by using very light materials like titanium, memory metal, and carbon fiber. Some frames are now so thin that people forget they are wearing them. Others have flexible hinges, hypoallergenic coatings, and modular designs, so you can personalize them. Then smart glasses arrived. While early attempts like Google Glass were not very popular, the idea of augmented eyewear is still around. Nowadays, modern versions have audio, cameras, fitness tracking, and even heads-up displays. Companies are still trying to find the right balance between how smart glasses work and what they look like, and they hope to make them something that people will want to wear every day. Eyewear retail has also changed. You can now upload a selfie, try on frames virtually, and get prescription lenses without ever going into a store. This change, along with clever branding, has made glasses a very successful e-commerce industry. And we can't forget fashion. Today, glasses are a way to show who you are, with choices ranging from round frames to minimalist to vintage. In the digital age, Glasses do more than just help you see. They also help you filter what you see, protect your eyes, do sums, and show the world who you are. As we look to the future of glasses, the lines between technology, biology, and fashion are becoming less clear. We're now entering a time where correcting vision is just the start. Glasses can make people better at doing things, be used as computers that you wear, or they might not be needed at all in the future. The future isn't just about seeing better. It's about seeing things differently. One of the most promising areas is smart eyewear. Companies like Meta, Apple, and Amazon are working hard to make glasses that work perfectly with augmented reality, AR. The idea is to overlay digital information, navigation, notifications, translations, and even 3D objects onto your field of view, all without taking out a phone. These devices want to do what smartphones did for communication. Make it quick, hidden, and feel like you're part of it. At the same time, prescription lenses are getting even better. Some companies are trying out special lenses that automatically change the focal length. Don't use bifocals. You don't need to keep switching glasses. Liquid crystal or electrochromic technology means that these lenses can respond to your gaze, lighting conditions, or visual needs straight away. Medical technology is also making big progress. Gene therapies and stem cell treatments for certain types of blindness are showing promise in early trials. Bionic eyes, once a thing of science fiction, are already being developed. This involves retinal implants and brain-computer interfaces, which aim to restore some vision to the blind. If these technologies improve, glasses might change from being used to help us see to being used as a temporary solution. And in the future, we might be able to use them inside our bodies or via our brains. But glasses aren't going away just yet. Actually, glasses are still popular, even though they're becoming more high-tech. Designers are combining traditional styles with modern ideas. 3D printed frames, recycled materials, modular designs, and customizable colors are all making glasses personal and wearable. At the same time, virtual reality headsets, which used to be big and uncomfortable, are getting smaller. They're using optical science to create experiences that feel like you are in another world, and they look like goggles. These two, in a way, are the spiritual successors of a lens. What started as a tool to help monks read in 13th century Italy has now become a way into the digital world, a medical marvel and a cultural icon. The story of glasses isn't just about helping us see more clearly. It's about how the world sees us and how that changes as we take in new information.